The Mythical Tale of Magic. Eons ago, the time of the mystic kingdoms, a young girl was born into the noble family of the great Margot. He was known across the land as the Margot of physics, and the love of his life was an earth mystic, well known for her magical powers in the kingdom of flowers. The little girl was brought up in the kingdom of nature to honor and respect the magical flow of the universal energy all around, and to worship the beauty of all living beings. This creativity of life, this magical flow, ran through her bloodline for thousands of generations, and her father and mother taught her the fundamental truth that it will continue to flow eternally, but only if it was released with goodness for the goodness of all. The little girl, known as Birdie because she flew at night with the fairies, had a wonderful childhood. She grew up surrounded by nature and learned from a young age how to commune with the magical beings of the land. She was friends with the trees, she ran wild with the grass, she chirped with the birds, and she bathed in the mud. She had many long talks with her faithful friend, the long-haired sheepdog, and they played endlessly together in the land of magic. One day, 3 travelers broke into the magic castle and stole something very important from Birdie. She was hurt and upset, but didn't want to get them into trouble, so she didn't tell anyone. Then she sadly realized that she had lost her magical touch, which is how she talked to the trees, and she cried for a whole day. But she knew one day it would come back, so she danced on into the fields and continued to smile and laugh with the bees and the butterflies. Years later, as Birdie became a young woman, now grown in knowledge and learning of the universal energy, now alive with the flow of creative magic through her blood, now vibrant with life and curiosity, she met a young prince who lied to her. She was so hurt by this that she became too fearful to speak, and she lost the power of her magic ears, which were hers to discern the truth. She cried for a whole week, but she knew one day it would return, and so she danced into the moonlight and flew with the owls into the forest. In the dark, wooded forest, she met a young, handsome magician with long, dark hair. They talked for hours under the light of the moon, and he told her that he came from a powerful lineage of Margots from the mystic kingdoms below the ground. Birdie had never known of these kingdoms, and she was curious to explore. The young magician took her by the hand and led her down into the earth, beyond the realm of light, and led her straight into the kingdom of darkness. Here, Birdie was tortured and constrained by the forces of evil, and she began to lose the magical power of her heart. She begged the young magician to release her from the painful grasps of the dark forces, but by now his king and queen had appeared to ensure that the magical flow of creativity carried by her blood was entirely drained from her life force. One day, she escaped and fled the land of darkness. She ran and ran until her feet could not carry her further. And when she finally stopped, she realized she was far from home. She had entered another kingdom altogether. She had lost the magical power of her heart, as she could no longer feel. She cried for months and months. But she knew one day she would learn to feel again, and so she began to dance with her new community of friends within the kingdom of pleasure. And here she stayed for many years. After leaving the kingdom of pleasure, she entered the kingdom of creativity, and here her hopes began to return. I'm home, she thought, as she began to meet so many other wonderful beings who had the creative flow emanating from their souls. Then one day, she met a big giant. He towered above her, but he seemed very gentle, and so Birdie wasn't afraid at all. He offered her a chance to release her flow of creativity, and he would collect it and use it to serve the goodness of all. This sounded like music to her ears, and so she willingly began to release her magical flow, and together they created many beautiful things. That was all they were, things. Birdie began to lose her energy. Her life force was draining away, and she began to feel faint. I don't understand, she would say at night as she would collapse into bed. There must be something wrong. And she could no longer see the way. She had lost her magical power of sight. Birdie could no longer touch. She could no longer hear. Her heart was closed, so she could no longer feel. She could no longer see, and she had lost the will to speak. She was totally lost, and she had lost all of her magical powers except one. She left for the desert to sit in a cave, and she cried for a whole year. One day, a warrior of the soul entered into the cave, and although Birdie couldn't see him or hear him, she suddenly became aware of the most enchanting perfume that she had ever experienced. The warrior of the soul was carrying a bundle of sage, and its perfume was exquisite. The smell of the sage enlivened Birdie's memory, and she began to remember who she was. She began to remember how to see, and she saw how beautiful was this warrior of the soul. She began to remember how to hear, and she listened to his wise words of truth for days and days. She began to remember how to reach out and touch, and they gently embraced and held each other tight. Her heart began to open, and a rush of feeling gushed from her being, and she released from her lips an exclamation of love. Hand in hand, they walked from the cave and into the sage flats of the desert kingdom, and embarked on their most profound, powerful journey of their lives together. The journey into the kingdom of consciousness, where all of Birdie's magical powers could flow freely within the creativity of life, eternally released with goodness for the goodness of all.